The Denver Broncos are the favorites to win the 2026 AFC Championship and represent the conference in Super Bowl 60. Why? Well, the Broncos are a good football team, a very good football team. But more importantly, the Broncos put themselves in a perfect position for the postseason. I'm Henry Chisholm from DNVR Broncos, and today we're digging through data and history to figure out just how big of an advantage the Broncos created for themselves by winning the number one seed. Winning the number one seed is an important step for teams looking to make a Super Bowl run. Since the NFL playoffs expanded to 7 teams per conference in 2020, 50% of number one seeds have gone on to appear in the Super Bowl. That 50% mark is pretty steady throughout NFL history. And about 50% of Super Bowls are won by the number one seed from one conference or the other. Why? Winning the top seed comes with a few advantages. First, the number one seed doesn't play in the first round. They receive an automatic entry into the second round of the playoffs. That's a massive advantage. Because of that first round bye, the team gets to take a week off. That's the second advantage. The Broncos, for example, will rest up for a couple of days this week before holding practices on Friday and Saturday. Then they'll have a normal game week next week as they build up to their first game of the postseason, maybe with an extra practice early in the week added to the schedule. The value of the rest is subject to debate. Yes, the team has a chance to heal up. They'll be fresher than their opponent, which played a grueling playoff game during the wildcard round while the Broncos were on their practice field. But that week off could, as you've probably heard, lead to rust. And for that reason, we're going to ignore the value of the week of rest, since you could make the case that it hurts just as much as it helps. The third perk of the number one seed is that the Broncos will play the lowest seeded team remaining in the AFC in each of its 2 games leading up to the Super Bowl. That may not feel like much of a perk this year, since the talent gap between AFC playoff teams doesn't appear to be substantial. But let's take a look at what the DVOA rankings have to say about the AFC playoff field. A perfect metric to gauge the performance of NFL teams doesn't exist, but DVOA is about as close as we can get. The metric is complex, but essentially, the guys at FTN take every play of the NFL season, put them all into an algorithm that cross-references the results of those plays, and spits out a rating for each team's offense and defense based on all of those results. The final rankings from the AFC this season is very similar to the seeding of the playoffs. The only difference is that the Broncos are in the top seed, and DVOA suggests Pittsburgh belongs behind Buffalo and Houston. That means the Broncos' opponent in each round will be the worst remaining team in the field, according to DVOA, unless the Bills and Steelers are both alive after the wildcard round, in which case they'll be flipped. The final perk of the number one seed is my favorite. It's massively important. The Broncos will be in Denver for every game until the Super Bowl. In the NFL playoffs, the home team wins a little more than 2/3 of the time. Think about that number this way. Imagine if instead of winning 2 home games to reach the Super Bowl, the Broncos had to win 2 neutral site games. Let's call those games coin tosses. There's a 50% chance you win the first, there's a 50% chance you win the second, and that leaves a 25% chance that you win both games. With the 67.4% chance to win each game, which is the rate at which home teams win in the NFL playoffs, there's a 45% chance the team wins both games. And if we flip that number for the road team, there's an 11% chance of winning back-to-back games. But a wildcard team would likely need to win 3 consecutive road games, not just 2, so they would have a 3% chance of making the Super Bowl. That's a lot of numbers, but to be clear, based solely on the rate at which home teams have won over decades of NFL playoff football, the number one seed has about a 45% chance of reaching the Super Bowl, while the number 7 seed has about a 3% chance. That difference is, obviously, massive. And in Denver, the gap may be even wider. The Broncos have the NFL's 5th best record in home playoff games at 17-5 all time. On the road, the Broncos are 3-10. Maybe it's the altitude, maybe it's the crowd, maybe it's just a fluke. But the Broncos have a wider gap between their home and road playoff win rates than nearly every other team in the NFL. Home games have been crucial to the Broncos' deep playoff runs. We started this video by talking about how all number one seeds have fared pretty well in the NFL playoffs. About 50% of the time they make the Super Bowl, which is slightly better than the 45% chance that we found when simply looking at the rate at which home teams win. Now, let's look back at the times the Broncos have been the number one seed. Broncos' first number 1 seed came in 1977. The Orange Crush defense led the Broncos to a 12-2 record. Denver went on to make the Super Bowl, but lost to the Cowboys. A decade later, the Broncos were the number 1 seed again in 1987. John Elway was the NFL MVP. He led the Broncos to the Super Bowl, where they lost to Washington. 2 years later, in 1989, an 11-5 record was enough to finish first in the AFC. Once again, the Broncos made the Super Bowl. Once again, they lost, this time to the 49ers. In 1996, the Broncos would take the number 1 seed, but would lose to the Jacksonville Jaguars in the divisional round. 2 years later, the Broncos won the number 1 seed again and finally beat the Falcons in the Super Bowl. Then you get to the Peyton Manning era, where in 2012, Peyton's first season, Denver finished first in the AFC, but lost to the Ravens in the divisional round. The Broncos were the number 1 seed again the next season as Peyton Manning won MVP. This time they made the Super Bowl, but lost to the Seahawks. 2 years later, the last time the Broncos were the number 1 seed, the no-fly zone defense earned the Broncos the top seed, and they would go on to win it all. Count them all up, and that's 8 number 1 seeds in Denver Broncos history, 6 of which ended at the Super Bowl. 6 of the 8. Now the Broncos have a 9th number 1 seed, and Broncos Country should love what history has to say about their chances of making a Super Bowl run. But the position the Broncos put themselves in comes with some pressure. Opportunities like this don't come often. John Elway only earned the 3 number 1 seeds that we talked about. To sit in first place and be as healthy as the Broncos are is very rare. The Broncos will be able to run it back with this version of the team mostly intact next year. Maybe some moves along the fringes. You might not have John Franklin Myers, but there's no guarantee that even with the same talent, they'll be able to replicate this level of success, even if they do run it back. The Chiefs and Chargers are lurking in the division. And there's examples all across the NFL this year. Take the Washington Commanders. Last year, rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels led Washington to the NFC Championship game. Commander fans thought that they could be at the start of a dynasty. This year, Daniels was 2-5 in the games he started. Tides turned quickly in the NFL, and most of the time you don't see it coming. The Lions were the number 1 seed in the NFC last year. This year, with virtually the same team, they missed the playoffs. In fact, in the past decade, 9 of the 20 number 1 seeds have missed the playoffs in the following season. But the future doesn't matter today because the Broncos have a Super Bowl in their sights. Opportunities like the one the Broncos have built for themselves are rare, very rare, and they're incredibly valuable. If you trust the numbers, they've got a coin toss to go to the Super Bowl. If you buy into the history at Mile High, then you could see them having an even better shot than that. The Broncos don't lose home playoff games. We've got decades of history to back it up. Buckle up because we might have an extra month of football in Denver.
We all silly like the mayor.